Everyone is joining us for this parallel session with two talks. Congratulations if you've made it so far. It's nearing the end. We've got three excellent presenters today on this particular session, excellent throughout the day. The first talk addresses the potential of MOOCs as a decentered process for collaborative professional development, delivered by Diana Laurillard and Eileen Kennedy. Diana is Professor of Learning with Digital Technologies at the London Knowledge Lab at UCL. At CGHE, she leads Project 2, realizing the potential of digital technology for scaling up higher education. Eileen is a senior researcher at UCL, and she works with Diana on Project 2. The second talk will shed light on the growing development or growing trend of Chinese international students returning home and its implication for development, delivered by Professor Kaho Mok. Professor Mok is Vice President and concurrently Lam Man San Chair Professor of Comparative Policy at Nanyang University in Hong Kong. I'm very pleased that we have you here. And I give over the virtual floor to Diana and Eileen to give their talk.
Hi, everybody. So Diana and I are going to be reporting on our progress with our project on realizing the potential of MOOCs. We're presenting a new model for MOOCs, and we're going to show how this could support a decentered process for collaborative professional development. As we face unprecedented social and environmental challenges, the public service mission for higher education has become ever more pressing, and events like COVID-19 have underscored the key role universities can play by mitigating the impact of crises and preparing and planning for alternative global futures. We argue that harnessing the power of digital technology will enable universities to work at scale with local and global communities. We need forms of education that prioritize plurality, diverse knowledges, networking and problem solving, which can develop the world's capacity to address the challenges ahead. For this, we need more porous boundaries between university and professional communities. This will support universities to adapt quickly to changing needs and deliver lifelong learning as envisaged by the UN SDG 4. The form of MOOCs we propose are not just any MOOC. We've created a model which we call the CoMOOC, a co-designed collaborative MOOC, which we've been testing for its capacity to support professionals to learn together from each other and become the vital part of the knowledge development process we need them to be. During the design-based research we've been conducted for many years, we have developed a theory of change that we're presenting today. The CoMOOCs developed following this model have enabled professionals to develop and share knowledge together, and our current project is also exploring ways of curating that knowledge so professional communities can access it beyond the CoMOOCs. We've done this with teaching knowledge, sharing knowledge as learning designs, and we're now suggesting that we could do this for other knowledge communities too. In this way, our approach picks up on some of the themes that we've already heard in the conference. For example, it could have been designed to address Adam Habib's assertion that we need to break down institutional and national boundaries, borrow and learn from each other in a collaborative and equal manner. So now Diana's going to take you through the theory of change.
So we looked at several other versions of theories of change for interventions, but none of these really represented our own co-design approach. So that's what we wanted to do. So we had to develop our own theory of change to represent the various stages of how we felt this should work. The 5 stages of engage, develop, extend, embed, and sustain progress over time, but could you click? Each one can then iterate to inform the earlier stages. And it's important to have a theory of change if you're trying to make something happen differently in the world. And that's why it has to be iterative. You keep learning as you're doing it. And we've talked a lot about the change that we need over these past 2 days. And what we're trying to do here is to find a way to make some of those changes actually happen. And the foundational idea here is that we have to do this in collaboration with others, hence the co-design approach. So the essence of each stage is to find a way to work collaboratively on educational innovation in this case, but also work at scale. So I'm going to illustrate each stage here in terms of a MOOC that we developed in response to the pandemic. And this was to help teachers move to blended and online learning. So the first engage stage in this case was to work with teacher volunteers who were already experienced in using digital methods and who could contribute, could you click please, could contribute video case studies on how they use digital methods themselves. Because of course, teachers are most convinced by what other teachers have to say, so it's a good technique. The video from this UCL academic, for example, showed how her lecture was linked to exercises with spreadsheets and data analysis and so on. And the need was clear in this case, but in many cases, the engage stage would begin initially by finding out from the intended audience from the course what they thought they really needed. In this case, of course, we were working to a felt need across the world as teachers were having to change to online learning. But then for a different course in the context of teachers of refugee students, for example, there the teachers wanted to break out of the traditional methods they were using to give their students a greater sense of their own agency. Next slide.
It is the next slide.
Sorry.
Okay, I think that's what you're looking for.
No, that is the correct one, yes. So anyway, the choice of the MOOC platform for a teacher professional development course was driven really by the scale at which they can operate. We wanted to reach lots of teachers around the world. And the pandemic meant that teachers everywhere in all sectors suddenly needed to work out how to teach online. So at the develop stage, these case studies were integrated into the FutureLearn MOOC format, which enabled teachers to not just watch the video case studies, like here's another one here being illustrated, but also work on their own learning designs for the same kind of session and use the discussion forum to then exchange their ways of adapting what they were seeing in the demonstrations to their own teaching context. So that's a way in which, although there may be hundreds of different types of learning contexts among the participating teachers, each one can localize and customize that general form. So there's no expectation that it will transfer without adaptation. They do the adaptation. Okay, and then for the extend stage, then we actually run the MOOC. And at this point, we discover how teachers in very different contexts are reacting are reacting to the methods and ideas which are being illustrated in the video case studies. And what's remarkable in the discussions is that although there is variation in the resources and capacity in different places, there's great similarity of commitment and determination among these teachers to do their best for their students. These courses attract the most dynamic teachers on the whole, but they are the vanguard of future innovation. And so we're in a position to learn a lot from being able to join in their discussions. And that's part of the two-way process that's so important in this kind of co-design. So some of the participants, as you can see here, take up our invitation to apply to be mentors on later runs of the course. We're now about to start the 12th run next week. And we have over 40 mentors now. It's a tremendously valuable cohort. And several of them have come back repeatedly on later runs of the course to join in the discussions. And as you can see, they're from all over the world. Their role is to join in the conversations and bring their own diverse experience and make their own contributions to the further development of the course, because they come up with some very nice ideas themselves. So while the extend stage is important for scaling up, the embed stage is vital for impact. And of course, if the participants in the MOOCs don't change their practices, as a result, ultimately there's no point. So we have to support teachers to orchestrate that process among their colleagues. It's no good just that one teacher doing it. We really want them to be able to spread the word. So we use the work of one of our colleagues at the UCL Institute of Education, who works on change in school and college institutions. And he kindly contributed his video case study here on his well-tested approach to implementing change. And what, after all, is what this course is demanding people do, is that they implement change in their courses and institutions. So this step gives participants an outline of what he calls a vertical slice team. So you cut through the personnel in the institution so that you've got all types of staff are represented on your team, your change team, and they're the ones brought into developing the change process. But something like blended learning, that's essential. So this activity gives participants a kind of skeleton process and the resources to adapt. And then finally, the sustain stage has to ensure the continuation of support for these new practices. For a course like this, it's now, as I said, it's about to start its 12th run. And after that, it'll remain as an on-demand course on the FutureLearn site. And it's maintained there because UCL is a FutureLearn partner. So in that sense, its sustainability is assured. But we want it to do more than that. And with the 20,000 participants that we know from the course reviews, so many of them that they've been able to seed impact in many of their own contexts. As you can see here, there's one person commenting that we can now navigate with certainty online and blended learning and teaching, have their rules and recommendations to maximize what we do. And another one says, this was an excellent blend of input and practice. And that's what a lot of them comment on. It's a very practical way of being able to take what's been in the research and the previous findings and case studies from other teachers, and now they can take it into their own practice. So I think I was intrigued by Craig Soudian's reference to different kinds of theories of change yesterday. And I think we're somewhere between his two extremes. He had reform at one end and revolution at the other, where you scrap everything and start again. I think we're more like a kind of in the middling, branch out and come together kind of theory of change. I think that's what we're aiming for. Okay, but we're also really fundamentally here trying to talk about the collaborative development of knowledge. And for that, we need a boundary object for sharing innovative teaching ideas across cultures and disciplines. A boundary object in the context of research journals is a research paper. But we, in this context, are exchanging ideas about learning and teaching. So we use our online tool called the Learning Designer for exchanging ideas about how to teach this in this way. So the exercises in the course then invite participants to go through the process highlighted here, which is to build on existing learning designs. And the learning design will be several hours worth of work, which the teacher is guiding and conducting the students through, much of which will be digital or online, but not necessarily. It could just be conventional. Then they have to adapt that existing learning design to their own context, test their own version, and then submit it for peer review by two others, who the reviewers are asked to recommend the good designs to the educator team, who then review it with a more challenging rubric to make the final revisions so that it can then be published on the Curated Designs website, where you can see a bit of this here on the Learning Designer website. So this cycle of collaborative knowledge development is, in a sense, emulating what we do in journals in science and scholarship. Journal papers won't work for teachers sharing ideas, but the sharing of formalized learning designs, carefully structured way of representing what you do, that's beginning to work. And the orchestration of that process needs this kind of collaborative MOOC model to enable it to work at scale, bringing all those people together, those professionals, to work together and to inform us about what they need and what they're doing. And this is not just for teachers, but for other professions as well, as Eileen will now show.
So as Diana says, this process is not restricting to teaching knowledge. We've developed CoMOOCs with other professional communities. The example here is the community-based research CoMOOC. The engage stage involved collaboration with NGOs in Lebanon who were conducting community-based research on many topics, including the needs of refugee communities where they were often based. The developed stage involved filming community-based researchers in the context where they lived, in refugee camps as here, and developing practical collaborative activities and discussions around those videos. We extended this knowledge through the CoMOOC to community-based researchers from 71 countries, and we have over 8,000 enrollments so far. You can see in these two reviews that participants find the experience of learning from practicing researchers really valuable because it's the practical, but also, as one reviewer puts it, innovative knowledge that they need. Not everyone has the skills to be a self-motivated learner, and so it's important that the professionals who do engage, as Diana was saying, with the CoMOOC, share the knowledge with others who can't. One of our NGO partners, the Syrian refugee-led MAPS, for example, created a hybrid course around the CoMOOC to develop the skills of refugee students on their higher education program to enable them to identify the community's needs and design solutions. The practical case studies and activities enabled the NGOs that we work with to embed the MOOC in the research training that they offer their communities. It's important for those participants to see members of their own communities positioned as experts in the videos. And sharing knowledge about community-based research is vital for MAPS because they are regularly approached by universities who want to do research on their community. By contrast, they want to do it themselves. So MAPS is continuing to add extra content to the CoMOOC and is aiming to create its own community-based research centre so it can take a more active role in these research relationships with the universities. So that's the route to sustainability for this CoMOOC. This is a model then for community knowledge building that digital platforms can support. In conclusion, therefore, we propose that universities use the potential of digital education in the form of CoMOOCs in order to decenter the process of collaborative professional development. In this way, we can break down boundaries to create genuine knowledge exchange between universities and professional communities that will produce the practical and contextualized knowledge that we need. Thank you.
Fantastic. This was very insightful and thought-provoking. And we indeed already have a question in the chat. Victoria, would you like to come in? Turn your camera on and microphone.
Hello. Thank you for this opportunity. First of all, it is a very interesting session, and congratulations for the presenter for today. The issue is very important for our contemporary society and education. I want to ask, what is the most relevant advantage of CoMOOCs as a co-design process? Thank you.
Shall I start?
Yes, you go.
Okay. I think it's the fact that it's collaborative, Victoria, because what we're trying to do here is, as Eileen was saying, is to achieve a decentering of the way in which we do professional development. So we're working with professionals, and I think this would apply to absolutely any professional context. We work mainly in teacher professional development, but teachers are having to learn a lot about how to teach online, for example. But in conducting that process, if we were to be coming in with all the research that we know about teaching online and just delivering that, that would not be sufficient. They are practitioners themselves. They know a lot. They're with their students every day. They've got a lot to contribute. And the advantage of the kind of MOOC platform that we're using is that there's a lot of social learning on it. And they learn a lot from each other, and we learn from them as well. So we might be talking about a teacher's current practice, which works perfectly well in one context. There'll be other contexts in which they have to work it in a different way. So we all learn from each other in that process. And I think orchestrating that is what this kind of MOOC platform gives us the opportunity to do. is to work together as professionals to develop knowledge, to push it forward.
Thank you very much, and congratulations once again.
Very kind, thank you.
Thank you. Carol, you have got the question or you have your hand up?
Yeah, I want to ask a question.
Go ahead.
Congratulations, Diana and Eileen, for a wonderful presentation. Well, I think we are living in a new normal. I think going on with the technology enable environment for informing teaching and learning and delivery would be a part of the way forward. I just wonder, when you are developing this CoMOOC project, what are the major challenges? Because working with different organizations for collaboration would mean to develop common understanding. And I just wonder, what are the major challenges during the process of developing this project? And the second one would be, because we are fortunate in a more advanced, developed society, we would have the facility and infrastructure appropriate for supporting us for doing this sort of, online learning platform. But how about those, countries or regions, they may have difficulty, like Global South? What would then be your advice? Thank you.
Good questions. You want to go first, Eileen?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm just thinking about the second of your questions there. And I mean, of course, one of the okay, so to start with the first one, what's the most difficult thing? I think the most difficult thing is getting to a shared understanding of what we mean by, I suppose, that a CoMOOC, because people have so many different ideas about what online learning is, and particularly now after the pandemic, everyone's had experiences of it, but they've had different kinds of experiences of it. So we're talking fundamentally about that collaborative, live, very, inspiring environment where people are not positioned really as learners, but are actually positioned as participants in the knowledge building process. And it's for professionals, it's not for, undergraduates, it's not for people that need much more support, but it's people who can contribute. And in that way, I think that it connects with a lot of the things that people have been talking about so far in the conference. It's sort of, it's trying to get at that kind of practical contextual knowledge, that we need. But in terms of the second question about, we work a lot with partners in the Global South. Access to internet is obviously not everywhere, but for professionals, for teachers particularly, but other professionals, you usually, as Diana will always say, you can usually get to them. And the thing is that that's what the co-design is all about, isn't it? It's like sharing our resources and coming together so that we can, we in UCL paved to use the FutureLearn platform. We negotiate with other platforms as well, but so that we can help with that. But the expertise that we need to build into these MOOCs is coming from those professionals who are actually working at the right at the face of the problem.
I absolutely endorse all of that, and I would only add to that your question at the end, Kaho, was about infrastructure and access, which is a critical question, of course, but that is changing rapidly all the time. And we've been astonished when we're working with people like refugee communities in Lebanon, for example, and the amount of access they actually do have. I mean, they'll be working on their smartphones, and smartphones are not ideal, but they do give you access to education. And even in those most challenging of situations where people are being displaced, and there's far more displacement of people now, tragically, since the pandemic and since the Ukraine war and so on, than there were before. So we're going backwards in terms of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But the digital space is the thing that stays with them as they are migrating or as they're forced to move. Their physical space has been destroyed, but their digital space is still with them. So it has that kind of thing to answer to the access problem. And the other thing is that the corporate technologies companies will certainly be enabling people to have access far more quickly than we can ever build schools for the 250 million children who need them. So that route to access to education is more likely to be successful in the short term, at least, than trying to go through to the physical route. Now, we don't believe that you can do wholly online education for schools and for, I mean, for even undergraduates, it's difficult. You have to be reasonably mature to be able to do wholly online, but you can do it in collaboration with partners in different countries. So we're talking about professionals, of course, and as Eileen said, through the professionals, you can reach the others. But ultimately, it would be much better, of course, to be able to reach directly to the students, and one day, perhaps we will. That's an important question, though. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's another question in the chat. Carrie, would you like to come in and ask it?
Carrie, how nice to see you.
I really enjoyed hearing about about this. So just a couple of quite practical questions. One is, what's the kind of optimum size or scale for what you're thinking? You know, is there a sense of a limit in terms of creating this online community? And do you see any offline communities forming? How do you see that interaction between the digital and the physical? So I'm thinking about, for example, refugee camps. Is there a way of layering a digital community into localized physical communities? So thank you so much for what you're doing. I really enjoyed hearing about it.
Well, there's two questions there. So I know that Eileen will have something to say about the second one, particularly the optimum size. We don't really know, to be honest. I mean, I wish we had hundreds of thousands in our MOOCs and not tens of thousands. And you know, they carry on over time, and they can remain there on demand so the community can come back. And the critical thing for a collaborative professional development MOOC is having that boundary object that allows you to build the knowledge in the way that we have. Well, that's what I'm calling journals, you know, which traditionally we have. And things like the learning design, and we can collect people's learning designs and share them and build on them and things like that. In other professions, it might be sharing action plans, or it might be sharing techniques for, you know, bringing solar panel systems into a community or whatever. So it will be something like that, which allows you to make something together. And this process is wrapping around that to enable that process. But Eileen, can you remember what Carrie's other question?
Yes, it was about the idea of the relationship between the online and offline kind of local communities. And when we talked about embedding the MOOCs in sort of local practices, that's really what we had in mind, that idea of like blending MOOCs, you know, to enable people that couldn't really, you know, follow the whole thing all the way through, that they lack the motivation, or they're struggling with aspects of it, to be supported by other people. And many of the participants in the CoMOOCs say that they are sharing, you know, what they learn with other people. And that's what I mean, I think that is the route to the sustainability of this kind of project, but it's also potentially the way of reaching some of these people that you can't get into the MOOC on their own, you know. And so but one thing about that we've learned with this idea of blending and embedding, that unless people are there in the first place as a genuine partner, a co-designer of those MOOCs, then they don't feel that that they belong to them, and they're not likely to do that. So this is why we emphasize so much this idea of co-design, because you can achieve an awful lot with it, but it has to be a genuine collaboration.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you. I think with this question, we then move to our second speaker of this session. If any other question come up in the audience, please just directly post them to Diana or Eileen. If we're more than happy to respond on the chat. Okay, Caro, all set?
Thank you very much, Golo, for chairing this section. Today, I would like to present to colleagues about our Program 10 under the CG project, which is part of the project with a focus on examining about how Asian and Chinese students going abroad, and then after their experience abroad, when they what's then their job search and also graduate employment situation. And in the last 2 years, we in the annual conference of CG, we presented various papers regarding our Program 10 project. Previously, we focused on undergraduate student and also master student, also comparing those students. They really came to UK for having their regular degree, or else they joined the transnational higher education program offshore in China mainland or in Asia. And this year, we work with Peking University and also Beijing University of Technology together for working on another group of students. They are more high-end students. They are having the PhD training student. So we would like to know about this sort of student after having their higher degree, especially in the professional PhD program or PhD program in general. And then after having this sort of learning experience elsewhere, would that be they stay at home or they stay in the overseas country for job? So the topic for today, the theme is our topic is about bringing a growing trend of Chinese intellectual students returning home for development. So I have my co-author online with me, Dr. Youliang Zhang, and also our colleagues from Peking University, Wei Bao. So sending students abroad has long been practiced in China mainland, beginning in 1978. It's a special year in China mainland because it's marked the open door policy and starting the economic reforms. And since then, the Chinese government, we established higher education system and also begun to allow and also encourage students to go on with higher learning. And in the last 4 decades or so, we witness more and more students going abroad for learning, not only, as I mentioned, for undergraduate, master, and even for PhD. And in the earlier phase, those students in earlier phase in the 70s and 80s, the primary group of students, they were funded by government, and the minority would be self-financed. But these days, we are having more and more students. They are not entirely relying on government funding. They rely on their self-finance sources of funding to go overseas for learning. And this paper would be interested to look about in what way those students having PhD training, their job search, and also their experience in job placement. Regarding international labor migration, or more specifically, the analysis of global mobility of academic talents, the conventional wisdom highlight the flow mainly from developing countries to the developed ones. So as many as about 80% of international students flow from in the world may come from developing countries, and they are mainly studying in developed countries. Historically, many of them would continue to work, especially having PhD, as a migrant worker in countries where they earned higher education qualification without returning home from career development. And analyzing such an international labor migration from the developing world to the developed ones, the existing literature normally refer to the flows as bring-drain, which is a phrase coined to describe the out migration of skilled and professional personnel from developing countries to advanced industrial nations and to United States in particular. As Laurillard rightly argued, although international students are frequently hidden in the category of skilled and professional personnel, they are understandably a major population within the skilled migrant category. And going beyond the above conventional perspective, and this piece of work, I want to contextualize into the changing political economy, and also we can draw the perspective from the global capitalism in understanding about the mobility of this trained personnel from mainland China going overseas, and then their pathway of graduate employment. The reason is that the war of talents has become more intense, specifically when national government and major transnational corporations have tried to grab highly skilled talent for enhancing their global competitiveness. And this paper put in this particular wider context in understanding about mobility. So this figure one shows you about the increasing number of returnees indeed in the last decades or so, more people having the training overseas going back home in the case of China. And our study focus is a collaboration between Beijing University of Technology, Laurillard University, and Peking U by adopting a survey, a questionnaire survey conducted and completed in November 2019. We sent out about 3,200 valid samples, and then after cleaning, the final effective sample is around 2,600 valid cases. And the samples are in Hong Kong, Macau, also enhanced. So this is some major finding, how those respondents told us about their choices. We can see that they prioritize more opportunity going back home in mainland China, and they do want to excel themselves after having experience elsewhere, but go back home to work. And these are the organization or sector they aim at, they pursue their career development, the research institute, because the PhD trained, university are the majority, and government and other sectors. And figure 6 also shows you about the area, the provinces or city or region they aimed to land themselves. Not surprisingly, because major universities are concentrated in Beijing area and Shanghai area, for those graduates, they go abroad for learning, and many of them go back to China. They also go to major area with the cluster of leading universities. So Beijing and Shanghai are more favorable to them, but not in other part of the countries. And when asking about their reasons contributing to going back home or returning to the country for work, these are interesting reasons. Of course, we gave them multiple choices. At least they can identify a few reasons. These are the top choices, like good prospect for domestic economic development, thinking China's, because this is in 2019, the government policy of introducing returnees is very attractive because the government rolled out different form of talent retain or attraction of talent back to the country. And the domestic political environment is relatively stable. And they also think the society lacks a sense of rules and needs human relations to handle things. And they also point out about domestic environment, mental pollution, and food safety are varying. These are some factors affecting their perception when they work in the domestic condition. And some of the reasons, again talking about the perception of foreign working conditions, these are some of the highlights here chosen by our respondents. I won't go into detail because of the time constraint. And comparing about the domestic and foreign university, there are interesting findings regarding about the foreign university and research institution, domestic in the mainland or foreign university. These are the major area that they think about. Overseas university offer very good funding, but at the same time, in the mainland one, there are something very special to the mainland, fair to apply reward and research project. Management is too administrative to guarantee academic autonomy. There are some of the factors which would affect their design. And this is interesting to know because the national government is very keen to establish Guangdong area. About 2-3 years ago, the government rolled out a national strategic plan to encourage more overseas or mainland young people to work in the Greater Bay Area. The Greater Bay Area actually is in southern part of China with a large city in Guangdong province and 2 special administrative regions, including Hong Kong and Macau. So if we contextualize the finding from this survey, linking to the GPA, it is interesting. We have another survey asking about young people whether they want to go to work in the GPA. According to this particular survey, we also find that those talents, they prefer Peking and also Shanghai rather than GPA. And my research team and I also conducted another survey asking Hong Kong people, particularly young people, age 18 to 35, whether they would seek the opportunity and venture themselves in the Bay Area development. So when we ask them, it is interesting, 60% know about the opportunity, but we're talking about the willingness or take action to work in the Bay Area is not high in terms of the responding. So this is quite consistent to the study that I just presented to you about the talent having the PhD training elsewhere. When going back, they choose Shanghai and Beijing as the preferred destinations. So I want to just end this very short piece of presentation by asking myself and also the audience about the case of China is interesting. The case shows that people having the learning experience elsewhere, normally according to the history and also the international literature would suggest they prefer staying in the developed countries for work. But perhaps because of the last few years pandemic and also the changing relationship between China and other countries in the world, the rise of new geopolitics would have affected the opportunity or at least the perception of these talents originally coming from China. They would end themselves back home. So riding over the COVID-19 crisis, bring bridge building and bring circulation could be another aspect for looking into the situation. And the Chinese government is very keen to bring back people, but in what way the government can attract people not only to Beijing and Shanghai, because the government is very keen to develop GBA area, but in what way the government can come out with policy not only to attract global talents to stay in the country, but also to serve the global and regional community would be important. And developing more bridges through this bring bridges would attach with the talents across different parts of the countries and beyond to foster intercultural diversity will bring positive effects on various academic and social development in China. So I just end here by inviting question, comments. Thank you very much. Thank you. Chair, back to you.
Thank you, Garo. We have questions coming in. Yushan Shi is a first-year PhD student in Oxford, currently in a public workspace, so asked me to raise the question with you. A recent news came out a few weeks ago reporting certain elite Chinese universities have decided to opt out from the World University Ranking and decided to build on its own evaluation system, which stimulated discussion around this, how this would affect China's place in global higher education and research. So the question is, with this growing complexity in geopolitical situation, how would this tendency to focus on internal system building influence the students' decision to study abroad and the recognition of international degrees when they return in the future?
Well, I think I need to unpack the question, because university ranking is one thing. Certainly, I agree with you. Students, when making their choice, may make reference to university league table when they apply for programs. But some of the Chinese university has decided to excuse themselves from the global ranking exercise precisely because those universities, I think, they are more focusing on humanities, like the People University in China, in Beijing. And well, for university, we focus on only humanities and social sciences in major would be disadvantage, in my opinion, for this kind of major global ranking exercise, because when we are looking into the production of papers, talking about the index and also citation, primarily those university more comprehensive and also with a medical school or hard sciences would generate more citation, which put them into better positions in terms of ranking. So, but whether it would affect internationalization of a Chinese university, I don't think the decision for leaving some university, leaving the university ranking would mean Chinese university are no longer taking internationalization serious. So I just I respond to that. But whether the student going from to overseas learning would have the problem going back to China for work, I think China is just like other countries in the world, is looking for world talents. And in the next phase of development of China, my country, I think we're talking about sustainable development, talking about how to sustain the economy. And China is now talking more seriously, not manufacturing in China, talking about design in China, talking about innovation-centric entrepreneurialism, which certainly require people having a different sort of knowledge, skills, and mindsets. So graduating from good university elsewhere would offer multiple, more cross-cultural learning, and also offer more dimension of skills to the Chinese employers.
Okay, yeah, thank you for your response. Hope Yushan is satisfied. We got a few more questions in the orders how they were posed. I'm going to bring in Paula, then Diana, and then David. Diana and David actually have really related questions. So Paula first.
Thanks. So I've got a question for Professor Mock, which is, you mentioned that the Chinese government can put in place some policies to get graduates beyond Shanghai and Beijing, but I was curious whether you have any examples of things that the Chinese government can do specifically to encourage that. And also, I've got another sneak question that I posted in the chat later, which is, do you have any indication of how Chinese graduates' preferred destinations for work have changed since your survey in 2019? Thank you.
Well, the second question is easier because since 2019, we haven't conducted another wave of research. So I could not give you a very scientific, answer. But in terms of anticipating about the choices of students in mainland, I think it's not only about the conditions being constrained with the domestic condition. It's very much to do with the global economy. And the COVID-19 pandemic has certainly affected mobility. And no matter how brave you are, because the global economy has been affected, and how far those talents graduating from China, going overseas for learning and having very good qualification, but whether they can get a job elsewhere depends on other countries' provision of jobs, number one. Second, as I mentioned lately in my talk, I think the geopolitics has certainly affected collaborations, and more fundamentally is about trust among university and institutions. And given when President Trump was in his administration, and he has a lot of anxiety for expelling or discouraging Chinese talents working in US universities. And hopefully it will be improving, but again, the relationship is very tense. And in what way, if I were those talents, they may have think twice. Going back to your first question is about encouraging people to move from Shanghai and Beijing to work in other parts of the countries. I don't think the Chinese government can force those talents to go different parts, but the government can create a more conducive and attractive environment. As I mentioned in my talk, the GBA project, the Greater Bay Area Development Blueprint, has set out one of the major aspects is to encourage university in Hong Kong and Macau to work with universities in the Bay Area to build a cluster of very strong university modeling about Florida and Boston Bay Area experience. So if those universities have a stronger collaboration, take for example, one of the top university in Hong Kong, Hong Kong UST, and now is building the branch campus in Guangzhou, Nansha area. And the operation is very much adopting the Hong Kong, operation. So emphasizing about internationalization with very abundant sources of funding. So with that collaboration, I think you will attract at least provide the platform or choices for talents, mobility within the country. So I hope it could be the case, but I need a crystal ball in front of me. And at the same time, because individual choices, no one can really say definite about their decision, but the government can create the opportunity for having the platform for those talents to choose. So I hope I make myself clear to you. Thank you very much, Paula.
Okay, thank you. If you permit, I would ask Diana and David to ask the questions and then you respond. I feel like the questions are related.
Okay, sure.
Diana, do you want to?
Yes, thank you. I was intrigued by your reference to transnational bridges for development and cultural diversity and so on. It sounded like a great idea, but I couldn't imagine how it works. Could you just say what you mean by that? What would the people involved be doing?
Well, people talks about bringing is seems to be more zero-sum game. When I'm talking about the bridges would be, even though some Chinese students, they land themselves in other countries for work, but their network still maintains with the mainland, or they can extend their networks and working with the network to serve the countries, and then kind of bridges between those people decided to stay in overseas institutions or work sector, and also be building a bridge with those returning home, because human relationship, social relationship remain. And with modern day technology, as you just rightly presented, using the online and also creative use of the virtual environment could certainly facilitate collaboration. But all these bridges being built very much depends on trust. What is worrying about our contemporary society is we are losing the kind of trust, even though we may have the infrastructure in place, but in what way we can creatively use the infrastructure for producing a more friendly and trustworthy relationship. So I hope I make myself clear to you that.
Thank you. Thank you.
So yes, sort of kind of just to build on that, I mean, it's really interesting. The 70% return rate, where I was really surprised by 2018, has obviously been going up and up. Is that just loyalty and a sense of home and family calling? Are there financial incentives to return for Chinese students? Because I know the talents programs, there are financial incentives to come, aren't there, and to stay as well. I mean, what role does money play in this?
Part of the reason would be financial incentive, because as I mentioned in my paper, the paper has just been published in full. So one of the strategies adopted by the Chinese government is to attract not only about those returnees, but also roll out different kind of talent attraction program, talent retention program with a very good packages in order to attract those people back. Not only about the compensation package for individual, they would love to even brought in a team of colleagues with laboratory support. So so that's why I think those talent, they can choose wherever to go. Then they look into the support. Also, some of my understanding with my contact in China, they even set up the base. That means the laboratory by government through the university. Then and given the research team additional support, I think it's really attractive in the context, especially when some of the countries or region, they have cut down their resources in supporting research. The second is about maybe to do with national feeling and loyalty against the context as they face about some sort of racism and even discrimination. What we discussed during the COVID or in the against the context of new politics. The worsening relationship with the Chinese government and some of the Western countries would encourage or gives at least give these talents another thinking, whether they have to go home for work. This is another reason. But most important of all, I think a higher education system in China with the significant investment in the last few decades has improved significantly. And they have a good, very hungry young people. They are trying to pursue higher degree, which is for sure So that's why when we are thinking about the work environment, the research environment, building up a research community, I don't think China is very bad. And especially when you look into the evidence that China's rise in science in terms of publication in STEM subjects is overtake some established countries. So given all this together, especially if they are not social science and humanity, which is more culturally biased or culturally dependent, for STEM subject, I think it would be easier to move. So I may not given you all reason, but these are some of the observations that I can generate from my work. Thank you, David.
Great. Thank you, Carl.
And actually, in terms of safety, what stood out for me was as well that a significant proportion of your respondents stated safety as a concern. That is something, gives you definitely something to think about. Anand has posted a comment more than a question. Do you want to elaborate, Anand?
Yeah, I think Professor Mark has already covered the things I wanted to say. I think as a Chinese PhD student myself, I think probably the pandemic and the related issues, social security and racism, probably like contribute to students' change of intention. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Well, it's definitely because we also conducted another survey regarding more young students, the undergraduate and master student. One of the reasons affecting their choice would be their personal safety. It's we're becoming the high concern for them.
Yes, I can understand. That's something to can understand, especially given the current situation. Maybe before we close, we've got a few minutes. Permit one question. I can't permit a question from me. I was thinking, there's mobility back to Beijing and Shanghai. Does that precede mobility within China? Do these students who go abroad come primarily from Beijing and Shanghai and then just move back to their homes, or is there more to it?
Well, I think this is difficult to come up with a definite answer because depending on the job markets in the mainland. And now I think with the global economy situation is less satisfactory and quite a number of returnees going back home, their choice might not be free enough because so many positions being filled up or not vacated when as compared to the past when the economy is good. So I think some of the returnees, despite the fact that they may be aiming at Peking and Shanghai at the beginning, but because of the positions are not available, they may be choosing other parts of the mainland. So the Bay Area, as Paula asked me, the Greater Bay Area, if the proposed development about cluster of top university there would offer potential opportunity for them. So we have to watch out to see whether this Bay Area university hub would actually attract more returnees to work and research there. And in the next 5 years, we can do more research and report to you. Thank you, Golo.
Okay, yes, thank you everyone. If there are not more questions, I think we can bring this session to a close. We'll have a short break now for about 20 minutes. And then I hope to see you all at our last session, the final keynote, the University and Social Imagination from Carrie Facer. So I hope to see you all there. Thank you so much for your engagement. Thank you so much to the speakers for wonderful presentations. Yeah, great to see you all.
Yeah, thank you, Golo, for sharing. Thank you, Diana and Eileen.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.